Welcome to the UK-USA Transatlantic Tax Talk podcast, brought to you by Collier Bristow. I'm Aidan Grant, a partner in our Trust Tax and Estate Planning team. In this series, we explore the complexities of UK-US tax and estate planning, helping individuals and families navigate cross-border wealth with confidence. From wills and trusts to philanthropy and moving to the UK, we cover it all and always with a US perspective. Let's get started.
Hi everyone, Aidan here. I just wanted to pop on with some exciting news about the podcast. On the 7th of May, we're relaunching with video. We can't wait to bring you even more engaging conversations, now with a visual element launching across our social media platforms. Yes, even we lawyers have these. In the lead up to the relaunch, we'll be releasing our bank of audio-only episodes in quick succession. So for the next 3 weeks, you'll get a new episode every Wednesday. Kicking things off, our first video episode features US Attorney Barry Zane of Zane Law Global. It's an exciting discussion on the problems that arise with Americans in real estate that you won't want to miss. You'll hear us restraining ourselves from getting too excited at the prospect of the taxation of real estate. I know long-time listeners will find that's hard to believe about me. So stay tuned and we'll see you soon, both in your ears and on your screens.
Welcome to Collier Bristow's US-UK podcast. My name is Aidan Grant, and we like to use this opportunity to speak to interesting people within the US-UK tax and estate planning space. As ever, can I encourage you to hit that subscribe button if you're listening through a streaming platform, and that way you won't miss an episode. Thus far on this series, we've spent a lot of time talking technical with US-UK financial advisors and wealth managers. However, there may be some of you who still find the whole concept of investment advice complex, and so they've struggled with knowing where to start. With the help of my guests today, I want to ease you into the hot water rather than chucking you in. We're going to think about the search for an advisor, what to look for, and what to ask them. I have the pleasure today to be joined by Martin Heale and Janette Saxer, portfolio directors at the US team of Schroders Wealth Management. They each have many decades of experience in advising clients and growing their wealth with a particular specialism on the US market. They won't mind me saying, but a quick peek at their bios on their websites, and I would struggle to find two better suited people to be talking on this topic. Martin, Janette, how are you both today?
Good. Hello, Aidan. Very well, thank you.
This is going to be a great topic, and where I want to start with the two, if it's okay, is that primer for the new client who maybe is coming to an investment advisor for the first time, who maybe they've had a change of circumstances, they've married, they've come into wealth, they've sold a business. There can be lots of different reasons why they are fresh to this market. But let's assume they are completely new. The first thing that I imagine someone is going to potentially trip up on, and it's something that I have struggled with for the few times I've had to think about this, is the different job titles that your market, your sector likes to use. So Janette or Martin, whoever wants to start, could you take me through some of these titles that we're used to seeing? Investment advisor, stockbroker, wealth manager, financial planner. What do these all mean, and what is someone looking for?
No, that's a good point, Aidan. And it can be confusing on the face of things. There are reasons and history behind each title, and I could spend a lot of time explaining nuances behind each. Critically, I think what's important is, what is this person going to do for me? What is the role they will perform? And in many cases, an investment advisor, whether they call themselves an investment advisor, an investment manager, a stockbroker, a wealth planner, a wealth manager, essentially they are there to advise and manage a person and family's overall wealth to an agreed objective within a risk profile. I wouldn't get too hung up on the nuances of the descriptions people make or where they came from. It's about how good they are at managing one's wealth today. So as long as investment advisor, wealth and management are in the title somewhere, then you're off to a good start.
Wonderful. And we are going to come to later what those titles might be precisely from a kind of accreditation perspective, because that makes my eyes go even more cross-eyed. Janette, am I right in understanding that sometimes, and I think you've explained this to me previously, your role is almost like that of the quarterback? So your job is to make sure that the client has the right people in front of them, whether or not that's always going to be you, because it might be that you've got to bring in a financial planner to do some modeling or forecasting. Maybe there's a broker or someone who's an expert in pensions or life insurance needs to come in. But you and Martin really serve that kind of central coordination role sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. And we love the word quarterback, actually, because I think it defines it really, really well. What we like to do is sit down and work out with the client what they're looking for, and we can help manage and maneuver around the different expertise. So also another analogy I like to look at is a GP. You go to your GP with an ailment or looking for something, and actually that GP puts the right consultant in front of you to deal with whatever you're looking for. So whilst we can look from a holistic perspective and we can help actually manage the investments themselves, but if they're suddenly needing pension advice, then they need to have somebody who is probably classified as the financial planner, the financial advisor that is qualified to give that pension advice. The same way as when they're wanting to do wills and estate planning, we would look to lawyers who are expertise in both the US, UK world. So definitely we are the ones that sit down, get to know them, build up that relationship, build up that confidence with them that we can then put the right team around them.
I imagine, though, and partially this goes to where we're going to go later in this conversation about the things someone should be asking when they go and see an advisor, the sorts of very, very fundamental questions that someone needs to think about when they're reflecting on the advice they need. Partially that's going to go to what is the objective they're seeking. So in my brain often thinks about three fundamentally different things that I know that Schroders do all of, but requires a slightly different finesse each time. You've got those people that might be saying, I need some help understanding, where am I investing? Should I be putting more money into my pension? Should I be drawing down from this account or that account? And that kind of planning, modeling, forecasting. There's those people that say, I've got all this money. I don't really know what to do with it. Please help me invest it. And then there's, please help introduce me to, like I said, pensions expert or a life insurance person. They're very different jobs that all kind of come under this broad sort of umbrella of financial advice. But the key is to get in on the ground floor with the right person, such as yourselves, who will then turn around and say, you don't have to worry about why this person is the person they say they are. Leave it to us to be the GP, as you say, and bring in the consultant surgeon when you have a particular ailment, and I, as the GP, kind of am making the referrals. That's really the point to make.
Yeah, so to Janette's earlier point, we consider ourselves quarterbacks. Unlike perhaps some product specialists, for want of a better word, they would look at selling their product, managing their product, and that's it. But we look at the wider relationship. We want to bring the best of Schroders to a client in all aspects. Now, whilst our specialism is delivering very good investment performance through our investment portfolios, as you touched on, Janette and I, and indeed all of our colleagues, have picked up a wealth of experience over the years. So we can spot the moments when it's right for a client to, say, talk to a lawyer, an estate planner, a pensions manager, whatever the issue may be. Now, in our world, which is really quite specialist of US persons outside of the USA, it's a very small community of experts, and we know all of those experts. So the way we look at it is we can help a client meet the right person, the right specialist at the right time, because we know who they are. We can make the introduction at the right time, and we know a choice of experts in a particular field. We can help guide to select the best one, or we might go through names. So it's wider than just providing a single service. It's looking after the client's finances in its entirety. So we consider ourselves sitting on the same side of the table as the client and helping them with their overall needs and introducing the right specialist at the right time, simply because we've been there before. We know when to introduce the right person and who that might be.
I say very frequently to clients, I am aware of the fact that there is a degree of crossover between the work that various professionals do. So as a UK lawyer, I give tax advice. There are accountants who give tax advice. And to the lay client, they just hear tax advice and sometimes they're not sure where that person goes. In the same way between an accountant and a wealth manager, they'll sometimes think, well, who's advising me on which investments to be invested in and the consequences of or the tax treatment of those investments? Then it sometimes splits between the investment advisor and the wealth manager. And the really key part to this, exactly as you said, Martin, is the pleasure of the US-UK community, based particularly out of London, is that it is not a large community. Everyone, to the best of my knowledge, gets on very well with each other. We're a very cohesive, sort of cooperative, harmonious sort of group of people. And we are always very happy to sort of discuss amongst each other and share and introduce people, because we know that we all have this kind of familiar understanding of the client will have a particular set of needs. And indeed, where these people all do know each other, it just makes their overall kind of professional advisory package that much more coordinated, harmonious, led by whoever happens to be the quarterback in the centre in this scenario, Schroders.
Absolutely. And I think that is what the clients are looking for. But the first initial part is, which wealth manager, investment advisor, what do I need to look for of which house I need to initially first speak to? And as you know, Aidan, from a US-UK perspective, you've got to make sure they understand both of those worlds. And that's where it comes to accreditation and qualification.
Janette, you're doing my job beautifully for me. Let's think about those qualifications, because I know, because I've been on your website and I've looked at the accreditations that you have, there are lots of acronyms that exist in this world and lots of bodies one can belong to. I take, for example, Janette, you are a chartered fellow of the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investments. You are both registered investment advisors with the SEC in the US, and you both have a uniform investment advisor law qualification. These all sound like wonderful qualifications, and I'm sure they each have their own particular qualification criteria and consequences. What should someone in this space who is looking for both US and UK assistance be looking for from a formal accreditation perspective?
So, first of all, a client can take confidence from the fact that managers like Janette and I are authorised and self-regulated by our employer, Schroders. However, to meet the minimum standard required, we have to meet certain professional qualifications. We touched on some there. And there are different professional qualifications, but essentially a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment means that we have achieved the right level of investment qualification to be deemed professionally qualified to give suitable investment advice to clients. There are other routes, such as the CFA. Now, that's in the UK space. In terms of the US, you've touched on the FINRA and SEC qualifications there. So essentially, as long as an advisor has qualifications against their name and they are regulated by a professional firm, a client can take a great deal of comfort that that person is suitably technically qualified to give advice. But it is quite like passing one's driving test. One can pass the driving test and have your driving license and your certificate, but it takes a while for you to gain the experience to be a really good driver.
So really, on the back of that, the client needs to ensure that as a US-UK person, that not only are they regulated in the UK, as Martin mentioned, but they're also regulated in the US. And that's where the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is the SEC, is the US regulator. And you want a financial house and institution that has an SEC license that enables them to be licensed in the US, so that not only are the investment advisors, wealth managers that are in that institution can offer that advice and they're regulated, so the client is protected under US law. But again, that's what we've got our FINRA qualifications, that it means that we are individually US qualified. It means that we can travel to the US. So it enables the client to be internationally mobile. They can cross those borders without worrying that their investment advisor can still speak to them, because there are a lot of investment houses out in the UK that once the client maybe is back on US soil, that institution, that advisor can no longer speak to them, because suddenly they come under the SEC regulations as a US person, and then they might be limited with the advice that they can give.
Actually, from my experience, I have found that the inverse is often the case, which is the American who comes to the UK but wants to maintain their relationship with their existing advisor in the US. Look, I am sure I am preaching to the choir here, but what I am met with very frequently is the client that says, I really like my advisors at insert name of large multinational US financial institution here. And I say to them, do they know that you've moved to the UK, and are they happy to continue investing for you? And the client, the classic refrain the client says is, oh, I use my sister's address in the US to sort of continue the relationship, or I've got a postal address in the US, but it's fine. I say, so they don't necessarily know that you've left the US, because if they did and they thought about it, they would probably reflect on the fact that they can't give you that level of advice. And the consequence could be an increased level of tax or a degree of non-compliance in the UK. And so it's really, really important for an American who's looking to relocate to the UK not to just assume that because, the US is all pervasive when it comes to the tax and reporting system that they run, that's necessarily going to apply into the UK. I'm assuming that's not an uncommon scenario for the two of you with new clients.
No, it's not uncommon at all, but you're absolutely right. You have to make all of your advisors aware of all relevant information. It affects the advice they give you. It affects your liability and their liability. And critical to that is tax residency. So an American arriving in the UK, they are now liable for UK tax. That changes the type of investments an investment advisor should hold for you. So yes, the US investment advisor should be made aware. And in many cases, they wouldn't necessarily have UK tax investment knowledge. So in that case, they may say, I'm sorry, I may no longer act for you because your circumstances have changed. Yep. And at that point, advisors with cross-border knowledge should be engaged.
The slightly flippant refrain I use sometimes, but it is actually belies an underlying truth, which is there will be a client who might say, I've had this relationship with my advisor for 30 years. I really have this close connection, and I would give that up with great reticence, to which my response is often, in my experience, the issue is going to be one of probably enhanced UK tax rates, because what you've got in the US may not be suitable from a kind of tax efficiency perspective. In the grand scheme of things, what you are effectively accepting in continuing with that relationship is now coming at a higher cost, because that person's engagement with you means that your overall rate of tax is going to increase. If you like that person to such an extent that you are happy incurring that much higher rate of tax, that's totally fine. But my job as a UK advisor, and I imagine yours is the same, is to say, is that additional cost worth it to you? And if not, that's where maybe we start looking elsewhere.
Absolutely. And it's not necessarily just the cost, but it's also the expertise. You know, it's great having a good investment manager over in the US who might have performed very well, who've built up a really good relationship. But do they understand not only just the tax side, but the timing? Do they understand the foreign tax treaties that are between the US and UK? And for us, whilst we've had clients that wanted to keep some assets in the US, what it is about is communication and getting the team around you. Now, it's never say never. Sometimes you do have a very good investment guy over in the States, but it's all about getting them to communicating with their UK lawyer, communicating with their UK accountants. And even if they want to be multi-invested, it's the jurisdictions. They might have an investment manager also here, but actually getting them to talk to each other, getting them to communicate. Actually, you just need to make sure you've got the right specialists around them to ensure that it's not tax deficient, it's tax effective, but also it's ticking the box for the next generation, the next part of the family that might inherit their asset.
These kind of relationships, are supposed to be a matter of convenience for our clients. Our jobs collectively is to take on the burden of some of the clients' insecurities and concerns and to make them better. We are the dream makers. We are the wish bringers, effectively. And the more spread out your advisors are, the more siloed your advisors are in the advice they can give, the greater your risk is of something falling through the cracks. In effect, when people are overlapping and know each other and are based in the same time zone and the same city, it just means you've got a greater chance of everything being covered off, because at best you've got 1.5 or 2 pairs of eyes on every single matter. So people need to consider the consequences of maintaining such relationships very, very carefully where those aren't suitable for changing circumstances. You've told me before there are some quite specific things that people can be asking that really get to the heart of what they can expect their advisor to perform for them. Things like annualized performance. Could you take us through some of those sort of key incisive questions that we should be asking on the level of performance of the advisor?
Yes, I'd be pleased to. So the common questions are, a client will ask you what your performance is like. But as you say, a more incisive question, a more telling question is, what is your annualized performance? And put simply, if you simply say, what is your performance? You need to put it into context. And quite often, it's possible someone will quote performance over an unspecified time period as opposed to distinct years. Performance against what comparison? Against what benchmark? And is that benchmark appropriate for your circumstances? And I'm afraid this is a subject of a whole podcast to go into the nuances of a benchmark. But as an overview, that's a question. Another question is, what are your costs? And again, very open general question, but the question that one should be asking is, what is the total expense ratio of your service, of your portfolio? In other words, not just your management costs, but the total costs involved in providing me this service.
Because just sort of jumping in, Martin, sort of reflecting it back at you, performance is all well and good, but it's net performance less fees. So an advisor that quotes you, this many points higher, but charges you more than that in terms of the fees, is giving you less of a return overall. Or an advisor that gives you a more cautious return, but at a lower rate, is giving you potentially a greater return. So that's the sort of, for me, the client, what I'm thinking is, what's the money that's going to end up with me? And, how much is it going to cost me to get to that point? It's not necessarily just also about the performance.
Absolutely. It's about value for money.
Yes.
And the risk taken to achieve that return. That's critical as well.
Which will differ per client, because some clients, if they are at the younger end of the spectrum, might be happy with a higher risk profile because they've got a longer period of time to iron out any inconsistencies in the stock market, for example, whereas an older client might be taking a more cautious approach to their risk management.
That's right. And that's the responsibility of the manager to provide a service that is suitable to the client's circumstances. And the manager should take some time and consideration in coming to that conclusion and that recommendation in conjunction with the client. I think that's quite telling as to the professionalism and expertise of the manager one selects. And I'll just finish with one other question that sometimes clients do ask, sometimes they should ask. Where is my money going to be physically held? Where are my securities going to be physically held? And that can be useful from a security point of view and a tax point of view.
Janette, so to the point that Martin's just raised about where are my investments going to be held, taking that scope and expanding slightly backwards, I presume one of the first things that you're going to be discussing with clients is also their objectives, their preferences, which are going to largely inform the sort of the structure and the strategy that you're going to produce. So does a client have I'm going to say ESG, and then I'm going to shrink back quickly because I come out in a sort of thin ice very quickly talking about ESG, or particular stocks they don't want to invest in, or do they want to be in emerging markets? Do they want to be inside the US market, outside the US market? All of that initial discussion is presumably going to feed into your recommendations for the right build of the portfolio, which affects your costs and the performance as well.
Absolutely. Trouble is, though, before you even get into that question, as you're saying, or sort of discussion right initially, one of the first questions I like to ask the client is, what are they expecting from their wealth manager? So whilst there's a lot of clients that are interested in the performance, the historical performance, the costs, actually, when you get down to it from a relationship perspective, I always like to first find out what are they looking for from that investment manager. And I think you start building up a picture of the personality of your client, what matters to them, where it needs to be sort of looked at, and who they have ultimately is accountable for their account. So yes, we can look at, and it's a much bigger discussion when you mention the ESG, because actually a lot of people have different views of ethical investing over social conscience investing. And actually, I think, again, that's a very big topic. But when you're looking initially, I think they need to work out is who they've got sitting in front of them. Is that the team that's going to be looking after them? Is that the relationship team, or is that the person actually going to be making the investment decisions? And whoever's making the investment decisions, how long have they been in the team? What experience, how long have they been in the industry? What makes them actually particularly good for picking those investments? And is that their day-to-day person that they want to speak to? So I think these are first and foremost the things with clients, because actually what I find is a lot of clients are first looking for service and communication. I think historically, they've missed that.
Where, from my perspective as the lawyer, I think that's particularly important is the difference in how we have a relationship with our clients versus you have a relationship with those same clients. Because as the lawyers, probably more than any of the other advisors that a client is likely to come across, putting the accountants in, for example, as well, we are perhaps the most fleeting of the relationships because we tend to get brought in for a specific project, a task, some estate planning, some will drafting, etc. Whereas you, Janette and Martin, are on the other end of the spectrum because you have that long-term, regular contact relationship with the client because you are seeing them on a quarterly, 6-monthly, annual basis, whatever it is. You're talking about performance, how things are going. And that relationship probably with your wealth manager is getting on with that person is probably a much more fundamental concern than whether one gets on with one's lawyer. We are, sometimes more of a tool that is brought in to produce a product in a way that you guys, as that kind of quarterback role you were mentioning in the first half, really are that kind of ultimate relationship manager.
Well, I agree. It's a great responsibility to look after someone's wealth. You may be looking after the vast majority of their wealth, but it's there to provide for them for the rest of their life and their descendant. It may have to cover school fees, healthcare costs. It is a great responsibility and a great privilege. But as a result, you do have to find a wealth manager who you trust, who you get on well with, that you have a relationship with. So I can't overstate the importance of this because in the stock market, the relationship will be tested from time to time. Stock markets go down. Stock markets can be challenging. And you want to know that you can pick up the phone, talk to your manager, and you can have a sensible conversation and come to a sensible conclusion, be that to liquidate part of the portfolio or whatever it may be. So how many clients does your manager have? Do they have time to take a call from me? Will they be proactive? Will they contact me? And do they care? And this really comes down to the quality of the manager that you're going to have your relationship with. And you have to satisfy yourself. This is the right person for me to have a long-term relationship.
I was just going to jump in and say what you're really talking about there is value for money, which you have already both mentioned. Yeah, someone can charge you fewer fees, but you've got to get on with this person, both you and the client and the client with you. Are you going to be happy sitting down with this person once every however regular the period is and sitting in front of them and having that discussion? I would say there comes a point at which I am happy to pay for an additional level of service where I'm getting an additional level of service. This is a service industry at the end of the day. This is not purely mathematical.
Absolutely. And the thing is a lot of the houses are able to say, we offer the same service, we offer the same product. But again, you've got to build up the trust, you've got to build up the rapport. And actually at the beginning, it's understanding what the level of services. And as Martin said, it's, how many meetings? Are they always going to be contactable? If it's just minor admin, is there a team behind them that's going to be doing all of that? And it's just really when I feel I need to have a chat about my circumstances. Are circumstances changing? And do I need to think about the wider holistic issue? If those particular circumstances changing, what does my reporting look like? Can I have web access? And one of the most important things that clients don't appreciate its worth at the beginning is things like tax packs. Do they have the right tax packs from a US tax perspective? Do they have the right tax packs from the UK tax perspective? Will my wealth manager and investment manager speak directly to my accountant to make sure things are looking efficient? And I've got that rapport and that service around. And it's just building up a picture of what that wealth manager is going to do to them from that level of service.
Yes, it's a good point. There's no point in saving money in a wealth manager if, as a result, you're only going to increase your accountancy costs. In terms of your net expenditure on your wealth, costs are fungible, right? So, off of one side of the plate and onto the other side of the plate is of scant use if the whole cost is going up. The point you also raised there, Janette, is, I think, very apposite because you are dealing with a team, right? This is not a one-man band or that a client wants to deal with because, as you said, Martin, people go away on holiday and people, need to be able to know who they're contacting. So I presume, I've never been a client of Schroders, but I have known you both socially and professionally. Martin, if you weren't around and Janette was around and had to sub in for a meeting, that's probably something that you guys do to some degree. Knowing who else is in the team and meeting the rest of the team, knowing who the number two in command is, that's presumably also a really important part of the service offering of a wealth manager.
Absolutely. Well, Janette and I have known each other 30 years, worked closely together for not far off that. And we are joined at the hip. We work really well together. We know each other's clients. We regularly talk to each other's clients, and clients are like that. If somebody is away, there's somebody else that knows them very well and can help them. That's the importance of having a team. And we quite often meet clients together for that reason. But it goes beyond that. We have quite a number of people in our team around us. And again, we share important, relevant information across the team. So the idea being that if a client telephones and one of us is not there, somebody else can answer the phone and deal with them immediately. And what I like about the spirit we have, we are genuinely a team where we work together collectively for the benefit of the client. We are not a collection of individuals, each with their own clients, and they're very protective of them and won't share them. We genuinely are collaborative. And really, that's the spirit of Schroders.
It's like anything in life. When things are going really, really well, clients, they're happy to just go, oh, yeah, I know I can pick up the phone. It's when things start going wrong in the market or going wrong in their own personal life, they just want to know that they can call someone. And that's the same thing that I would say to client, do your homework on the company itself, on the company ownership. Do your homework that you feel comfortable with the stability of the firm that you are going to put your assets in and put your trust into. So it is about the personal as well, but just make sure you've done that homework. And I think that's so important.
One of the things that has been raised previously is, this idea of, what is your performance, which, if I sort of take away from the strategy side and put in the kind of the personnel side, I'm thinking of as, what is your track record? Presumably in that scenario, Janette, where you said, things don't always go well, would I be asking, hypothetically, take the start of COVID. I mean, that was the last time when the markets, to my mind, took a significant wobble. What was Schroders' approach in that scenario when your clients were banging on your door saying, get me out of this investment because it's dropping, understanding what the long-term, sensible, calm strategy of your advisor is going to be is presumably a really important part of helping me manage my expectations when things might occasionally temporarily take a dip.
So when stock markets do well, almost every investment manager can look good and perform well. But critically, how well can a manager perform when markets are more difficult and challenging? And no manager gets 100% performance 100% of the time. That would be impossible. But looking back at past investment style, philosophy, and performance track record is very helpful. A question a client might ask is, what is your investment style? What is your investment philosophy? And gauge how prudent or conservative you are as a house. One of the telling features is that if you see a historic performance record of, say, strong outperformance one year, strong underperformance the following year, strong outperformance the year after that, one would question the volatility and the positions being taken. One can obtain a very good long-term investment return by modest outperformance consistently year in, year out, with a compounded annual return, compounded investment returns growing and growing and growing. So one doesn't have to take ridiculous risks to generate a worthwhile return. That's quite a telling feature. And just to follow on one other point you made as well, when things get difficult, can you contact your manager? Are they going to be proactive? Do they phone you? And yes, during the COVID crisis, we attempted to contact every client to understand their situation, understand their views, their fears, their hopes, were there any changes in circumstances, and of course, to convey the house view.
And presumably, Janette, how someone is able to manage that sort of scenario where things go badly will largely depend upon how important is this client to the particular manager in question, to which a question to ask is, or to reflect is, where are you going to sit in this manager's book, this portfolio? Because I'm assuming that you aren't going to be this person's only client. So are you a small fish in a big pond? Are you a big fish in a small pond? But knowing that you sit within the sweet spot of this person, not just from an expertise perspective, but from a size perspective, is presumably both comforting and important to know.
Absolutely. It's just saying to the clients, I mean, we like to think we treat all of our clients the same, from the smaller to the larger. And it is building up the relationship with them. I mean, during COVID, we did attempt to speak to the majority of all of our clients. We also started to do more webinars with our chief investment officer on a monthly basis so that we could invite all of our clients to listen in. It was also recorded. So I think showing and saying to clients how we can adapt with the times, because each time, next time there's a crisis, it might be a very different one. But for us, it's just making sure it is, and as Martin said previously, it is communication and knowing they can reach us.
Presumably, Janette, one of the initial indicators, which is perhaps the one that sometimes we like to skirt around slightly, but is just a front reality of this relationship, is what will first indicate whether you are the right size to a client is most investment managers will have a sort of a minimum asset under management requirement. And there will be asset managers out there who have very high requirements and asset managers who have very low requirements. And that is because they are pitching to different ends of the market and maybe pitching for different levels of service. But that presumably is going to be the first clear indication of whether you fit properly within this person's typical client size.
Absolutely. I mean, we do start at the £1 million, and we do that because obviously, that is a sizable asset for some people where we can offer diversification in their investments. But we do find that our sweet spot is more the 5, 10, 20 million for clients. We can offer very much holistic service for them. But yes, it is. I think it's understanding which investment house is able to look after them in the way that they need the size of assets that they've got. And don't get me wrong, unfortunately, in our industry, there's many orphaned US clients that have a lot less than that there's really not many investment houses out there that can look after them.
Yes, although I will specify that we did do an episode with Lawrence Lee of Canaccord Genuity, who would ask me to remind people of the episode that we did there, where he had a slightly different view to you as to where that market sits. But I do absolutely take your point. One of the simple facts of being an American is that relative to someone of a similar level of wealth not being an American, your complexity is sort of ratcheted up by kind of 3 or 4 notches. And so the need for a competent and sophisticated advisor becomes that much more complicated than for a comparative non-American who maybe could get by without quite the same level of sophistication. Martin, I think the last area I want to sort of ask you to reflect on, or where you have said it can be of great help to clients, is in the idea of a testimonial. Maybe not from every client, but presumably the best place to seek reassurance for an investment manager's performance would be, well, how has someone else performed? And for the right client, is that something that's appropriate for me to ask?
Well, one of the things I say to people when selecting an investment advisor is personal recommendation. So if you have a good friend or anybody you trust who say, I've worked with this particular investment manager, I find them very good, this is where their strengths are, this is where they're not so strong, that's a very good recommendation. And I'd always listen to that advice. We do have clients who say to us, well, may I speak to an existing client of yours with similar circumstances and hear what they've got to say? And that's a personal testimonial. And yes, we're very happy to do that. Obviously, if our existing clients are happy to say they're a client and share their experience. That's absolutely fine with us. We have to be a little bit careful of client confidentiality and obviously not bombarding all of our clients with these requests. So we'll take each one as case by case, depending on how busy things are and our client circumstances. But in principle, no problem at all.
I mean, what I have found through my practice, this is getting increasingly multimedia as the world moves on. There is increasingly large amounts of publicly available information about firms, about individuals. There are, I don't know, hypothetically, some podcasts people can listen to understand more about how people will gel. I can't think of any in particular, but there must be some good ones out there where you do get that slight sense of the try before you buy, which I think in this kind of relationship management sector that you guys work in is particularly important. You know, have you heard that person speak at a seminar, or did you read something that they wrote, or some sort of testimonial that was written for them online? It's a lot easier these days to get behind that veil and look at the person individually than I think it must have been 20 years, 30 years, 50 years ago. So I would always say, although I appreciate my bias in terms of being a podcast host, see about finding some of those touch points that kind of give you that slight try before you buy scenario, and maybe that'll give you that inside edge.
No, I definitely agree on, whether it's LinkedIn, if people have got LinkedIn, looking at podcasts, even sort of calling up, getting the brochures, getting information, just getting things. And, Google is an amazing search operation now for us all. What did we do without it? I don't know.
Although I've heard several people say, for what it's worth, that AI will be the death of so many industries. And didn't people say something about Google and the ability to look things up, 20 years ago? We are all still here. So I'm imagining Schroders will be there for many, many, many more years to come. Martin, Janette, thank you so much for your time. I'm really confident that your sage guidance on what clients should be asking based on your many, many years of experience will be of great comfort to them. If people want to find out more about Schroders and the service that you offer, where could they find you?
They can find us through the internet, have a search, look at Schroders Wealth Management US Limited.
Use that Google that you were talking about.
Absolutely, use that Google, and you'll find a lot of information, our contact details, different articles that we've done. And as I said, LinkedIn, it's amazing who you connect with as well.
Marvellous. Once again, Martin Heale, Janette Saxer from Schroders Wealth Management, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to the listener. Once again, if you have not subscribed, please do so. It means you won't miss an episode, and we will look forward to hearing from our guests on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, Aidan here. As promised, here's a sneak preview of our relaunch episode with Barry. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode.
Right. Well, first of all, for a bank account, there really is no probate. If you've properly marked your beneficiaries on,
I was going to come to that this second.
Right, the designation forms, then you would not have probate. So truth be told, once you're in probate, you're in probate. The only difference is what's the level. There is, different states have small probate proceedings, but most of our clients are not. I mean, it's $50,000 or under in New York. So our clients are not dealing with that.
Probably not much real estate you can get in Manhattan for $50,000.
Yeah, no. Maybe the real estate called like a burial plot. That's about it. But
maybe. Hard to live in it.
That's all for this episode of the UK-USA Transatlantic Tax Talk podcast. Thank you for listening. If you found this discussion helpful, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for a topic for us to cover, then we'd love to hear from you. For expert insights and tailored legal advice, visit collierbristow.com. We'll see you next time.